But there's one story that I have stayed away from over the last couple months, and that is the Caitlin Clark story. And the reason I have stayed away from the Caitlin Clark story is multifold. One, I don't think there is really anything new or interesting for me to add to the conversation. She is a great player. I have watched her quite a bit, actually. And I think there's this notion for people that don't watch her, oh, she just shoots 50 times a game. That's why she has all this success. No. She's a very efficient player. She's a great passer, averages like 9 assists a game almost. And so when you try to double, triple team her, she hits the open person for an easy layup. And so I just bring it up because I enjoy watching her play. But like so many other things in life, you can't just have a conversation about Caitlin Clark, right? It can't just be she's awesome. That's the end of the conversation. It immediately has to be, is she the best this? Let's compare her to Pete Maravich. Let's compare her to men's players. Is she the greatest all time? Is she the most influential player of all time? I've heard multiple people on major networks say it's indisputable she is the most influential player in the history of women's college basketball, and I just don't buy it. Listen, there's been a lot of great players in this sport. Sabrina Ionescu just a few years ago, Candace Parker, Tennessee, Shamika Holsclaw, Tennessee, Cheryl Miller, Diana Taurasi, Breanna Stewart, Maya Moore. By the way, read up on some history. There probably wouldn't be a WNBA if it wasn't for Rebecca Lobo and the 1995 UConn Women's Huskies. So I don't know that there could ever be a more influential women's player than Rebecca Lobo, because literally there is a WNBA because of her. But I don't really talk about it, because if I talk about it, then I'm labeled a hater, a men's college hoops homer, a sexist, a whatever term that you want to use to describe somebody that doesn't put Caitlin Clark on a pedestal and say she's the greatest thing that has ever happened to sports in the history of whatever. So I've stayed out of the conversation. But I saw a narrative emerge on Tuesday afternoon that is so ridiculous that I just had to step in. I drew the line in the sand and say, I like Caitlin Clark, but we got to have an honest conversation. And essentially that narrative was this, is the idea that Caitlin Clark has single-handedly elevated the women's game beyond the men's game. It's ridiculous. It's dumb. And I want to break it all down. So where did this narrative come from? Well, it came from Sunday. We had the crescendo, at least to this point, of all things Caitlin Clark. If you watched the game or if you didn't, the numbers were astounding. And that's a testament to her, to the growth of the women's game. I'm happy. More people talking sports is good for my business. Doesn't matter what sport it is, okay? The numbers are through the roof. I think it was the most watched women's game period since 1999, Tennessee, UConn. And there were a total of 4.42 million viewers up, at its peak on Sunday against Ohio State, with an average of like 3.39 million. So incredible numbers, insane numbers. And then where the discourse kind of took it to another level was a tweet from Fox Sports PR guy, Michael Mulvihill. He does a really good job. All he does is tweet about TV ratings, and he put out this tweet, which I found very interesting. He tweeted, quote, women's college basketball is now averaging a little bit bigger audience than men's CBB on Fox, 981K versus 946. So 981,000 versus 946. Women's college basketball is up 48% on Fox this season and up 60% across all networks. And so ultimately, I have no problem with that. He's just sharing a fact. But then it immediately became a discourse of, oh my goodness, the women's game has passed the men's game. Now, I've seen a lot of people say this throughout the year. Nick Wright, I've heard say in passing that he thinks the women's game can, go beyond the men's game. Bill Simmons, I saw say, I'm going to be watching so much more of the women's tournament than the men's tournament this year. No, you're not, dude. Shut up. You'll watch when Caitlin Clark plays. You'll watch when South Carolina plays. Maybe UConn, maybe LSU. That's it. But then there was a tweet from a guy named Dan Wolken from USA Today, who is never afraid to share an opinion, however unpopular. Now, I'm the same way, so I can't really criticize. But here is what he tweeted. Here's what got everybody fired up. He goes, men's college basketball is very flat, relatively unappealing product right now. Coaching legends are gone or diminished. No star players are breaking through. And while I don't think the tweet is 100% wrong, The insinuation that Caitlin Clark has single-handedly elevated the women's game past the men's game. Let's pump the brakes because that is ridiculous. Now, for starters, listen, I'm not going to sit here and say the men's game is perfect. It isn't. And I know that I love men's college hoops. And if you're listening to this, you love men's college hoops. And that's great. I also understand that it is a sport that struggles to get traction during the regular season. Players come and go really fast. As Dan Wolkin said, the star iconic coaches, Roy Williams, Coach KJ Wright, have all retired. But at the same time, a couple things. One, I don't know very many people that 3 years ago were tuning into a Butler-Villanova game on a Tuesday because Jay Wright was on the sidelines. Maybe Coach K sort of brought some casuals to the sport, but not very many. And two, this is literally every sport not named the NFL or major college football. Ratings are down in men's college basketball. Ratings are down in the NBA. Ratings are down in Major League Baseball. Of course, ratings are up in women's college basketball. But the question is this, and the reason I would not be concerned if I was somebody invested in the men's game like I am, is this. Are the women's ratings up because it's this incredible sport that America has latched onto? Or is it because we have a transformational, transcendent, literally, by definition, once in a lifetime player in this sport? Again, just go back to what I said. Highest rated game since 1999, which means, you know what? At some point, this many people were watching women's college basketball. And so I bring it up because to me, the conversation isn't has it surpassed the men's game. I would actually argue it's the opposite. I would argue that this kind of proves the overall health of the men's game. Why is that? It's two reasons. One, it is because we are talking about the women's game just barely surpassing the men's game in ratings when they have a once in a generation, once ever type player in terms of ratings interest. Caitlin Clark is phenomenal. She's excellent. She's great. She's this, she's that. We all agree on that. But the question isn't like, oh, nobody watches men's college basketball. Well, does anybody watch women's college basketball when Caitlin Clark isn't playing? I know there have been one-off situations. South Carolina, LSU a few weeks ago, head-to-head, outrated the NBA that night. But I don't know that because in a year where you have a transcendent player, once-in-a-generation player, that because ratings are up and just barely surpassing the men, it's like, well, what happens when she leaves? Are there going to be millions of people that watch Iowa games or any games on Fox or ESPN or ABC when it's not Caitlin Clark? Because I don't really think that's going to be the case. And like, again, I'm not trying to be a hater. I'm just trying to spit facts. What's funny too, and I'll say this, I'd be curious how many Fox games in women's college basketball did not include Caitlin Clark. I know there's been a handful. UConn's played on Big Fox a few times. Notre Dame has, I think, as well. So it's not only Caitlin Clark, but the vast majority of games that are getting the vast majority of the ratings are Caitlin Clark. And so to me, it's incredible what she has done for the sport. But she single-handedly has elevated it. If the ratings stay where they are now, next year when she's gone, then that's going to be fascinating. But it's also kind of interesting that it's happening in a year where there hasn't been that transcendent player in the men's game. There is no Zion Williamson. There is no Trae Young, who, credit to him, I don't think he was even a very good college player, but he captured people's attention. There is no Cade Cunningham, John Wall, whoever. We all agree this is kind of the weakest draft class that we've ever seen. And the ratings are still basically on par with the women's ratings in a year where the women have a transcendent star that everybody tunes into. And so to me, I actually think it's a great sign for the men's game. Because what happens next year when Cooper Flagg comes and plays major college basketball? What happens in future years when we do get those transcendent stars, when we do get whoever? I don't know, the next Trae Young, the next Zion, the next this, the next that. And I'm not saying we're going to get another Zion 6'6" guy that jumps out of the gym that's 280 pounds. But I'm just saying, it's kind of a down year for the men's game, and it's as up of a year as the women's game has had in quite some time. And so the ratings are still basically equal. So I'm kind of making my point. I'm going around in circles, and I think the men's game is healthy. First of all, the product is incredible. Scoring is way up. There's a lot of really fun teams to watch. Kentucky, Tennessee with Dalton Connect, Alabama, Carolina with RJ Davis. UConn's going for back-to-back national titles. There's a lot of really good product on air, even if there aren't those transcendent superstars. And so to me, no, I don't believe that this is any indication that the women's game has passed the men's game. And to me, you know what the actual interesting question is that nobody's talking about? Again, Caitlin Clark's awesome. What I'm more curious about isn't has she elevated the women's college game beyond the men's, because I don't think she has. And we'll find out in the next year or two if there's any truth to it. But I'm more curious, can she be the first woman that I can remember who elevates the WNBA, who brings an audience with her from college to the pros? Because like I said, I've been following college hoops forever. And I've been following the women's game, not religiously, but I remember Candace Parker. I remember Rebecca Lobo. I remember, again, all of the stuff that Caitlin Clark is doing has been done before, not the scoring records, but the interest she's created. Again, Rebecca Lobo, basically in conjunction with the 1996 Olympics, that was how we got the WNBA. The women's Olympic team did a year-long tour. With Rebecca Lobo was a player on that team, but they did a year-long tour in the lead up to the Olympics. So we've seen this hysteria before, kind of at the amateur levels, but what we haven't seen that I know of is a great college player bringing an audience with her to the pros and elevating the pros. Sabrina Ionescu hasn't done that. Breanna Stewart hasn't done that. Diana Taurasi hasn't done that. Brittany Griner hasn't done that. Shamika Holsclaw didn't do that. That's going to be the interesting thing to me. Can Caitlin Clark be the Larry Bird and Magic Johnson of the women's game? Remember, highest rated, I believe, certainly the highest rated college game of all time. 1979 national championship game, Michigan State, Indiana State, Magic versus Bird. Those two guys go to the NBA and they basically save the NBA. And that's the interesting question. Can Caitlin Clark be the first crossover women's star who brings her audience and the excitement of the college game to the pros? That is what I'm curious about. But to answer your question, no. I don't think that the women's game has surpassed the men's game because ratings are slightly up with the transcendent star this season. All right, so this is what I'm going to do. Take a quick break. Come back. When we come back,